my guests. We're joined with the one and only Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri Lascaris is a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Dimitri ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. Dimitri, man, I haven't talked to you in a very long time. How are you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm getting by. How about you, Jamal? And by the way,
I'm.
thank you for having me on your program. I appreciate it.
Oh no, man! I wanted to get you on for a while to catch up, and there are all sorts of events that take place either in Canada or take place in the world. And I've seen you involved in some of these events, especially in relation to Gaza. And so I definitely wanted to bring you in. You've been somewhat outspoken on this issue. Over the past 2 weeks, give me your take in the rapidity of the fall of the Syrian government. I can't even call it a fall, it's more like collapse. Um, what are your thoughts in all of this? Let's use this as an underpinning to step into the conversation. What are your thoughts?
Uh, I think there are basically two uh, plausible explanations for what has happened, which are not, by the way, mutually exclusive. The one is that there was a secret backdoor deal involving, of course, Assad, which would see him and his family members being spirited off to Russia, where he would receive political asylum and be secure and retain whatever money, wealth he's managed to accumulate over the years, and to spirit out of Syria. Um, and obviously, the Russians, if that deal happened as a precursor to the fall of Assad's government, it would have included in some way the Russians and presumably Erdogan. And I think very well it could have included directly or indirectly representatives of the United States and or Israeli governments. So that's one hypothesis, which I think is plausible, and the other is that simply the military of Assad was utterly decimated by years of warfare, the impoverishment of the country. I understand they were making something like $40 a month. I mean, you're going to risk your life for that kind of money, especially for a leader who is deeply unpopular with large swaths of the population. And the Turks, using their proxy, this HTS terrorist entity, chose the right moment to attack. And it was a moment not only when Assad's military and economy were crushed and demoralized, but the Russians were very much preoccupied with events in Ukraine, and the Iranians were preoccupied with their own, unfolding war with Israel, this sort of low-intensity war. So, as I say, it could be both. It could be that at some point after the assault began, a deal was done. I think it's very likely that at some point there was a deal done, which did involve Vladimir Putin and Erdogan, possibly also Iran, the U.S. and Israel.
Yeah, they were the Doha agreements. And look, it seemed that the Syrian soldiers didn't fight. I recently had Mark Sloboda on. He was on a little bit earlier, and he pointed out that he thinks that they were effectively paid off. He pointed out that they were hollowed out. Of course, the U.S. had Kurdish forces sitting on top of the oil fields and the wheat fields, so they couldn't necessarily get the oil and the wheat that would typically undergird the government itself. And, many of those troops seem to have put down their weapons and went to Iraq, basically abandoning Syria in that sense. And,
Yeah.
It's fascinating to be like the way that mainstream media has immediately flipped. The man has a $10 million bounty from killing Americans, beheading people, and everything else. And then all of a sudden, he's a moderate. And, CNN is doing this softball interview as if they're talking to some random guy that, went through this phase in life where he was chopping off heads and putting people in cages and burning them up. But then he, realized that, yeah, that was wrong. I just want to be a different person now. I'm a better person. And, I'm loving light. And I can now tolerate all of these minorities that I couldn't tolerate even in Idlib, but I can tolerate them now. This seems to be rather outrageous to me, but that is the way that they're selling him.
Yeah, as FDR said, he may be a bastard, but he's our bastard.
He's our bastard. He's our monster.
Right.
I want to get talking about monsters. I want to play this other monster for you. I want to get your take on what I hate to play this. I'm sorry I hate to play this, but it's a show. Netanyahu, because Syria, Netanyahu immediately attacked Syria in order to, they say, create a buffer zone for the Golan Heights, effectively stealing additional territory. on top of the territory they had already stolen. And in this case, he's feeling pretty confident about himself, even going so far as to say that he was responsible in some way for this happening.
We gave the Israeli arms. This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its suppression. But it also means we have to take action against possible threats. One of them is the collapse of the Separation of Forces Agreement from 1974 between Israel and Syria. This agreement held for 50 years. Last night it collapsed. The Syrian army abandoned its positions. We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel. This is a temporary defensive position until a suitable arrangement is found. Equally, we send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel. We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel.
Give me your take on this. Is Israel really safe in this situation? I mean, up to this point, Al-Qaeda has not lifted a hand to go after Israel to any stretch of the imagination. I mean, in fact, what's wild about it, Erdogan had, 100,000 goons, give or take, at his disposal that he effectively used to hit Syria. And for all the talk that he was making about Israel, Netanyahu being Hitler, blah, 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 he used that against Syria, not against Israel or Netanyahu in regards to what Netanyahu was doing. Also, I saw various videos where they were extending a hand to Israel also and thanking Israel. A lot of people don't know this, but Israel had been putting money into these terrorist groups to undermine the Syrian government. Give me your take on what Netanyahu is saying there. What are your thoughts?
I first of all have to address this idea that the fall of Assad was due to his forceful action. This is complete bullocks. I mean, and this raises a larger question, which is why does this little geopolitical pipsqueak, because that's what Israel is. It's a little tiny state with a very small population and very few resources that matter to the world, for example, oil and gas, that manages to project its power pretty much all over West Asia with brutal effect. Why is that? It's not because of the inherent superiority of Israel's military forces or its economy or its technology. It's because the United States government, which has by far the world's largest military budget, showers Israel with military industrial goodies year after year. Not only does that, provides them with battlefield intelligence. I'm sure that at some point during the past 14 months of horror, American forces and British forces have been engaged in some way. American aircraft, military aircraft have been employed to assist Israel. Israel could not do any of this without the United States. I'm not just talking about the downfall of Assad, but any domination, even of the Palestinian people, it couldn't do without the full-blown support of the global hegemon. When it comes to Assad in particular, effectively what happened, as you've indicated, is that Erdogan saved Netanyahu's ass. Netanyahu's military was incapable of occupying a significant portion of South Lebanon for any significant period of time. They sent their elite Golani brigade in there, had its ass handed to it, despite the fact that they completely disregarded the laws of war and were inflicting enormous suffering on the civilian population of Lebanon. They managed to prevent the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, managed to prevent the Israeli military, with all of its funding and wizardry and gimmicks and toys, of occupying any significant part of South Lebanon for a sustained period of time. So effectively what happened is that Erdogan, despite all of his rhetoric, as you indicated, his anti-Israel rhetoric, saved him, saved his military. That's what's happened here. I look at Netanyahu as a front man. That's the way we should see him. He's a front man for U.S. empire, and a very good front man, I should say. And he's also a way for the American government to place some distance between itself and the worst crimes it is perpetrating or enabling in West Asia and in other parts of the world. So, we've heard this whole rhetoric during the last 14 months of genocide where the Biden administration says, oh, I'm so frustrated and we're doing our best and we want a ceasefire. We're not happy with the amount of humanitarian aid. This is all bullocks. It has always been bullocks. Israel is doing exactly what the U.S. government wants it to do. And the front man simply gives the appearance of separation between the United States and these criminal activities in the region and all the horrible suffering that they entail. This is exactly what we're seeing in Syria. Now, in terms of the future and whether this, in fact, is going to enhance Israel's security, I think there's a very serious question about that. First of all, I don't think this man, Jolani, this terrorist, is going to last very long. I'd be very surprised. He's 42 years old. He's never governed a city, let alone a country. He has a force of tens of thousands of men at his disposal. He's very good at killing civilians. Maybe he's even a good military commander. But is this man going to actually be able to unify Syria, a country that is so diverse ethnically, religiously, where there's so much division, there's so much poverty, whose infrastructure is being destroyed, even as we speak, by U.S. forces and the Israeli military and the Turkish-backed jihadists? I mean, no, I don't see that. And I don't see that the Americans and the Israelis would tolerate this man in power for very long, assuming he ever does become the president of Syria. I think what we're more likely to see, if he stays in power, then I think that this could be, all bets could be off as to what happens. What they're going to want to do, I believe, is they're going to want to put in power somebody like Sisi in Egypt, who is a brutal, corrupt dictator, who will maintain, who will implement the wishes of the United States government in Israel to the detriment of the Syrian people. Or they're going to try to get somebody, a civilian leader like you have in Iraq, who kind of, there's at least a pattern of his having been democratically elected, but at the end of the day, he too is a puppet, and he does at the end of the day what his American masters tell him to do. That's the kind of scenario I think Syria is headed for. And if it doesn't, this could blow up and have very detrimental impacts, not only on Israel, but on the wider region.
I guess I'm looking at this kind of similar to Libya and Iraq, where it effectively imploded. And you had this kind of civil war that took place that had been going on for God knows how long. We championed this like it was a great thing, ignoring the fact that there are, as you pointed out, many minorities that are in Syria that are terrified right now, believing that this act of diversity at some point is going to go away when the rest of the world stop looking, and all of, their lives are going to be at some level at stake.
And women, let's not forget that half the population of Syria is probably terrified right now.
Oh man, the beach. Like I remember I was watching this thing where this woman was at the beach and you had people in bathing suits, bikinis, guys walking around with no shirt on. All of that's gone away, even under the best of circumstances. Like, I don't think people get how fundamentally this country is going to change almost overnight as a result of these people taking over. From what happens to the resistance from here on out? I mean, all things being equal, Hezbollah has been, they were able to hold the line in regards to keeping them from coming into Lebanon. And even now, they've been exchanging fire back and forth. But for all intents and purposes, it seems that Gaza has been isolated in all of this. And it's even a question of whether or not Iran would be able to help or fund Hezbollah going forward. Because I agree with you. The person who's going to take power is going to be under this kind of Turkish, Americanish control. I mean, because again, these are Turkish forces predominantly. What do you think that means for the resistance going forward? I mean, do you think the government in power is going to work with any of these other groups, whether it's the Russians, whether it's the Iranians, or from your point of view, no, this is going to be Turkish, American, etc., Israeli-friendly government, and that's assuming it doesn't fall apart. If it falls apart, all bets are off.
Well, in the near term, this is a serious problem for Hezbollah. There's no question about it. The land bridge to Hezbollah from Iran has been severed. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that Hezbollah almost certainly does have the capacity to produce some of its weaponry, particularly missiles, locally. I'm sure it's developed that capacity. It didn't want to simply put itself at the mercy of the land bridge. But is it going to be able to, develop the kinds of missiles which were the long distance precision missiles that threatened, areas in central Israel or southern Israel, I doubt it's going to be able to do that without supplies from some external source, principally Iran. So what this means, I think, is that Hezbollah is likely going to be forced to become a local insurgency, not insurgency, but military force that focuses almost exclusively on the protection of the Lebanese border in South Lebanon. And the Shia population of Lebanon. That'll be its primary mission, and I think it's unlikely to be able to make any significant contribution to Palestinian resistance for this foreseeable future. Now, having said that, there are other resistance groups, and as a matter of fact, just today, Yemen launched a drone, which, according to Israeli media reports, entered Egyptian airspace, traveled over Gaza, and struck a building in central Israel.
They're getting so much better at that.
Yes.
They're getting far more accurate.
And they're certainly not letting up in the Red Sea,
No.
and their activities there have caused the port of Eilat to go bankrupt. The only Red Sea port of Israel. Iran does have the ability to inflict very serious damage upon Israel through its hypersonic missiles, but it's been 6 weeks, I think, since Israel last attacked Iran, and
right, they haven't responded.
They haven't responded. The Iraqi militias are still there, and they do have the ability to cause trouble to Israel. But there's no question that the major point of pressure was coming from Hezbollah.
Right.
So this is a blow to the axis of resistance. This is a real problem for the Palestinian resistance. And all I can tell you, Jamal, is, and I've been saying this till I'm blue in the face, we in the West are going to need to step up our game to pressure our governments to bring this genocide to an end, because it doesn't appear that the armed resistance is going to be able to do that in the reasonably near future.
I'm curious on something else. The West Bank. So, well, Smotrich said it once before, but this seems to be policy at this point, where they're basically going to annex the West Bank. Elements of Gaza is also going to be annexed. I don't necessarily know how much, but clearly that's going to be the case. The opposition to Israel and this kind of greater Israel project seems to be diminished, with the axis of resistance being diminished, kind of proportional diminishment. What happens in Gaza and the West Bank from here on out? I mean, if they annex the West Bank, what happens to the Palestinians that are living under the territory that they steal?
Well, either they're going to be forced into some other country like Jordan, or they are going to be annihilated, or some combination of the two. This is where this is heading, Jamal. I mean, if you let Israel get away with what it's doing in Gaza, why wouldn't it expand its genocidal project to the West Bank?
Yeah.
It just carried out a genocide before the eyes of the world, the most publicized genocide probably in human history, and nobody is held account. Not one soldier, not one military leader, not one civilian leader. So the Israelis are looking at this situation and going, hell yeah, let's just finish the job and rid ourselves of the Palestinian people once and for all. That's inevitably what's going to happen unless they're stopped. They're prevented from completing their genocidal rampage in Gaza. And frankly, I see no indication that there are any red lines in the halls of power in the West when it comes to Israel's behavior. They do appear to have decided to go all in and to give Israel carte blanche to commit any crime, any atrocity that it so desires.
That is, oh man. I mean, and look, I don't see any change for Trump from his standpoint. Joe Biden, I agree with you for all the grumbling at the basically gave a blank check.
Yeah.
What do you say to those people who say this is not the tail wagging, this is not the dog wagging the tail, this is the tail wagging the dog? Because I think I agree with you. This is U.S. policy, regardless of what Joe Biden says. Ultimately, the settler colonial state and the expansion of that state in the Middle East seems to be the goal, an objective, going all the way back to the Bush administration, who was going after Syria in order to hit Iran. And even Wesley Clark pointing out that Iran is next on the list, that every country that Wesley Clark pointed to at this point has been destroyed, with Iran being the last man standing up to this point. I guess from your point of view, where does this go? Do you think Jelani in the U.S., or for that matter, Turkey, is going to be able to keep the government intact before the government falls apart? Where do you think this ultimately goes?
Well, in terms of whether the tail is wagging the dog or
I'm
vice
sorry.
versa, yeah. No, I just want to focus the discussion on what U.S. military planners and civilian leaders were saying at the time of Israel's creation. They were saying, this was immediately in the aftermath of the Second World War, that the oil resources of West Asia were a stupendous source of strategic power. That's the way they described it, and one of the greatest material prizes in human history. And they were quite right about that. You have a global economy that is dependent upon oil, and there's a sea of easily accessible, high quality oil even today in the region. And that was the reason why, in my opinion, the United States was the very first government to recognize the state of Israel after the Zionist militias declared independence. And they have been pumping weaponry into Israel ever since. It is, I think, instructive to think of Israel as a giant U.S. military base masquerading as a country. It is there. It is America's rabid dog in a region which is of vital importance to the project of Western government, U.S. hegemony in the world. So where this goes from here, I think that has always been the objective, and that's the fundamental reason why the U.S. political and military elites have given Israel so much support over the years. They use Zionism as an ideology, as a tool to justify their crimes and their support for Israel. But the objective is one of not raw, naked power, in my opinion, the ultimate objective. Where this goes from here, I don't want to sound like I'm pessimistic about the future of the Palestinian people, because I'm actually not. Precisely because Israel depends so much on American power to exist in its current form as an apartheid, lawless state. If America's power declines, Israel's power will decline necessarily. And America's power is in decline. We are transitioning to a multipolar world, and however hard and desperately the U.S. government and the U.S. elite attempts to maintain a position of global dominance, that project is doomed. And when it ultimately fails, Israel will have to become a law-abiding citizen in its neighborhood. There's just no two ways about it. And I don't know when that's going to happen. And there's definitely going to be a lot of people killed before we get there. It could be, a few years. It could be a decade or more. But I think that this is ultimately going to end in the destruction of the Israel that we have known up until now. And it's just a question of when, not if.
And okay, I think I understand what you mean by that. The Israel that we've known up until now, basically a murderous state that doesn't have borders, that can kill, expand without any kind of consequences, into a state that is a normal state like any other state and is held to the same regulations as any other state. No, I do understand. Dimitri, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I've wanted to get you on for a while, so I'm glad that you hit me back. Thank you for this. Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Dimitri ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. By the way, where can people find you, Dimitri?
So my main gig at the moment is my YouTube program, Reason to Resist. You can find me on YouTube at Dimitri Lascaris 3051, or just put in Reason to Resist. I'm also very active on X, and my handle there is at Dimitri Lascaris.
At Dimitri Lascaris. Very cool, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Jamal. Good.
All right. And I cut him off too fast. I am sorry for that. No, I appreciate this conversation. In fact, I appreciated all of these conversations. We have one more coming up, and that's going to be KJ, and he is here. He has arrived. As you remember, we were having a conversation about the coup that attempted, or the coup attempt that took place in North Korea. And the people of South Korea